Hello everyone. So today I'm doing not only an in-depth and hopefully pretty quick tutorial on how to use all the buttons in Paint Tool Sai, but also it's my first video. There's a bunch of videos on how to use Paint Tool Sai. I think they're really useful, but this one's just like a super in-depth version of literally every button basically. How to use different layer modes, literally everything. Like if you haven't done digital art before, this will probably help you in other programs as well. And also just because I've been using Paint Tool Sai for probably over 6 years, so I kind of know what I'm doing. I know the program really well. I've learned a lot of tips and tricks, so I wanted to share that with you all. These are most likely in other videos as well. I don't really watch other Paint Tool Sai tutorials anymore, not since I first started. And when I first started, there wasn't really an in-depth every button thing, so I figured this would be a really good a little video for someone just starting out and want to figure out how to use this entire program really quick. So I'm going to do it as fast as possible. Let's go. So we're going to start off up here. This is how my setup is. You can go into the settings for Paint Tool Sai and you can change around where exactly you want your colors to go. You can have it on the left or right side. You can have them together, separate. There's ways to change that, but this is just how my stuff is. So to start off, you have this little box up here, and this basically just moves your canvas around. I don't really use this at all. I have a hotkey instead. Oh, and I use a hotkey for Q or a shortcut key. I use Q, so that's just my preference because I use my left hand mostly for my shortcut keys. But basically this little box up here and this hand are the exact same thing. When I use the hand to move this, it moves up here. Pretty simple, straightforward. You have your zoom, you can slide this in and out, or you can use the plus and minus, and your square will reset. And of course your angle, we'll change it back and forth. You can use the little clockwise or counterclockwise arrows, or press square and it resets, which is pretty standard for this program. The square usually resets to whatever you're doing. Next is paint effects. I personally don't really touch these in most speed paints or other tutorials. I don't really see people touching on these. I think you can just probably play with it and see what they do. There's watercolor effects and textures, paper and canvas, other effects. I really don't touch those at all. It's just not part of my painting process, and it's a bit annoying for me. So if you wanted a little tutorial on that, you'd have to look at a different video because I personally don't touch that at all. So yeah, moving on to blending modes and layer modes and whatnot. I have these three little images here all on separate layers, and I will be showing you what each of these do. I basically use all of these, not all in one piece. Most of the time I only use multiply, shade, and luminosity. And obviously normal. I basically use all these except for the binary color one. The binary color one I tried looking up online, and for the most part I can't seem to find out what exactly it does because it seems to make your image black, whether you have a single color on something or it's a full piece. I don't really know what it does, so I can't explain that one to you because I think nobody knows what it does, but I can explain the rest. So first we have our lovely multiply layer. Now if you've never used any sort of digital art programs before, I will be explaining what these all do and exactly how they work. So multiply. What multiply does, it's basically makes your color darker, whatever color you're going to be using, and then it also desaturates and slightly takes into consideration what color is underneath. So for example, I have this brown skin for this little character. Now I have a layer up top, and I will be teaching you about clipping masks and stuff, so don't worry about that. But for now, I have this medium red right here. And I'm going to use a little airbrush and shade it. Now, when I use this multiply, it darkens it. But unlike some of the other modes that I'm going to teach you, it desaturates it. Whereas if I was to use shade, it actually intensifies it a lot more and typically has a lot more black involved. But, going back to multiply, when you change the opacity, it's just like a nice desaturated red. You can obviously use any other color, but when you use shade, it's actually a lot more intense. And if you want that same sort of tone, you're going to have to go down a lot more to achieve that. And also, the shade mode takes into consideration the color that's underneath it by a lot, meaning it kind of mixes them together. It's not just a blank color on top, or shade or multiply is kind of like, it just takes like that dark red and it just kind of desaturates it, and that's why it looks that way. It doesn't take into consideration what's the color underneath, whereas with shade, it does take it, kind of mixes them together, and that's why it changes colors. Now, here we go. Next we have screen. Now, screen is something that you typically use on something with maybe like a darker setting, maybe for like a glow effect or something similarly. But what screen technically does, it inverts your layer that you have it on, multiplies it, and then inverts it again, and essentially just brightens the color that you have. So I'm going to take this blue that I have, or teal. I'm just going to put this right on top of the layer. On a different layer, it's right on top. When I hit screen, it kind of brightens it, as you can see. I typically don't use screen for like luminosity or very like luminous glowing objects or magic or glowing orbs. I don't typically use it. Sometimes I use it sometimes sparingly in combination with other sort of luminosity or like illuminizing layers, but never really alone. Let's take that off. Next we have overlay. So what overlay text does is it gives whatever color you're using on top, it gives it a slight hue to what is underneath. So for example, we have this brown skin, clipping mask, and I'm going to use this like neon blue, this deep neon blue. I'm going to color that in, and then I'm going to hit overlay. Now basically it's combining not only that blue I had, but with that brown, and it kind of mixes it together. You can change this to any opacity. I really like to use overlay in combination with glowing objects, but also at the very end of like really big pieces especially, I'll do an overlay on top of the entire thing, on top of like the line art and everything. And it kind of gives everything this cohesive look because they all have a very slight tint to it. Even if it's just a little bit, sometimes that really helps with the cohesiveness of a piece. Yeah, and also you can use overlay for grayscale pieces. If you like to really paint in grayscale and you got all your contrast and everything done, you can overlay colors on top, and that helps you like color it. You can also use it for textures. If you had like a watercolor texture, like paper look you want to do, bricks, dirt, I don't know, you can really do anything you want with that. Alright, next is luminosity. Now luminosity is again something that you're going to want to do typically on something darker, but what it does, it kind of ignores all the color info and it really brightens it. It's really like, I guess, white based, and I'll show you that. So I have this, I'll actually do a blue. I'll do a light blue and color this in. A little glowing object. Luminosity, it seriously brightens it. It makes what's underneath neon. If you have any whites, it's going to become like super white, super neon. Really good for glowing objects. Like I said, you can do it in multiple different ways, and you can use it in combination with screen or some like other blending modes. Honestly, like I think everyone really likes the luminosity feature. But yeah. Next is shade. Now I did briefly already mention shade, but quickly again, it's just kind of, here's my little color to shade with. Now, whereas multiply, will just darken that color only. It doesn't take into consideration the color underneath it. They don't mix, technically. Shade does, and it's a lot more intense, and it has a lot more saturation. This is really good if you're doing any sort of blush on your characters, because it does, like I said, take some consideration, maybe skin tone and whatnot. If you have someone with a cool skin tone, or like a yellow skin tone, a very deep one, it takes all that into consideration, so your blush color will match with your character and won't really stand out that much and look kind of weird or like makeup-y, I guess you could say. But yeah. Then there is Lumi Shade, which is basically luminosity and shade at the same time. You can use this on dark or light backgrounds or like objects or whatever. So I'll show you quickly. I will use this blue on our little character. This is what Lumi Shade's going to look like. Maybe I'll do a red, that might be a little bit easier to tell. Okay. So here's what multiply would look like with just a plain red. Here's what shade would look like. Very intense. Lumi Shade is basically a neon version of shade. I typically don't use this to shade at all. I really like to use it for glowing, or like kind of as like an overlay. Sometimes I use it in place if I have like a very bright piece. Typically I don't use this for shading at all, although I mean technically you could. But it doesn't really work for darker skin tones or darker shading. I guess you could say it would only work for really light skin tones. But yeah. And then on a dark piece, we'll have this. So we already know what luminosity looks like. And that's what luminosity looks like. And then this is what Lumi Shade looks like. Luminosity, Lumi Shade. Very different, like I said, super neon. It combines with layers underneath, and Lumi Shade isn't white based, unlike luminosity. You can combine these and get some really cool looking glows. I love to combine these, really fun. Yeah, especially if you're doing like magic or something like that. Sometimes I like to use it on my eyes to make them glow a little bit more. Yeah. And then, like I mentioned, there was binary. I don't really know what that does. It just makes everything black in my opinion, but whatever. Quickly moving down, we have our opacity. I think everyone knows what opacity does. It changes the transparency of an object on whatever layer you're on. Then we have preserve opacity. So here is my line art of a little character. So what preserve opacity does, I'll delete that. So I'm on my character's line art layer. What preserve opacity does is it locks, as it says lock down there, it locks that layer, and I can kind of change it to be whatever color I want. Now this obviously depends on like your workflow and how everything how you like to do things, if you like a lot of layers or whatnot. This just changes it to that. And when I unlock it or turn it back on off, it does, where I colored it, it doesn't change. Whereas if I go back and instead do a clipping group, which is it kind of gives the same effect, but you have a lot more leeway for change and stuff like that if you don't like what you did. Basically, my line art is our base, and whatever is on top of it with this red little line, that's my clipping group. So it's connected to what's underneath it. As long as what's connected underneath it doesn't have that red line, it's connected to it. Now, this layer up top of it is not connected at all to any of these. They're separate. If I want to add another clipping group, I can do as many as I want, and it's only going to affect my line art. So if I wanted to change my line art color, which I typically do in my pieces, you can use the bucket. It changes it to a dark red, or I can change it to a sort of orange color. Yeah, you can kind of do it that way. You can do that for line art or really anything that you want to recolor. And what I like to use with like a clipping group a little bit more with my line art is because later on I'll teach you about hue saturation a little bit. You can change the color. Let's just say you like really didn't like the color that you chose. Just hue saturation it, change it. Super easy. and it's easy to like get rid of if you don't want. And then there's selection source. I do not touch selection source at all, but basically what it does is you can do selection source. Now, basically what it does is it's kind of taking information from the selection source, and on you can make a different layer, and it's going to only affect what was on that past selection source, I think. Actually, wait, I don't know. Now there is selection source. I don't touch selection source like at all. I'm not really sure what it does. I've never really gotten it to work for me. Maybe I'm just stupid, I don't know. But I tried looking it online and it never really made sense to me. If you want to select just something on one layer, let's say you did not want to use a clipping group, you didn't want to preserve opacity or anything like that, you just want to select it for whatever reason. What you can do, at least on like a PC or Windows, I couldn't tell you about Mac, but there's probably information like that online, is you hit Control Shift and then click the layer. And as you can see, it selects only that. Now I can make layers on top. I can, let's just say, color all that in. And now I basically have a copy. Maybe do something cool with like 3D. I really don't know. You can possibly do it for like shading, if there's a shadow behind your character or something. Sometimes I use it just because I want to have like light only on one part of the body or on like the hair or something. That's typically what I use it for. Moving along, now we have new layer. That just creates a new layer. And then there's new line work layer. Now this is different from new layer because if you have any shortcut keys or hotkeys on your normal layer, these shortcut keys will not work on your line work layer. So you will have to, like, when I teach you how to do shortcuts and hotkeys, you're gonna have to set that individually. Line work's pretty easy. If you know anything about vector points or anchor points or anything like that, it's pretty easy to use. Here's your lines. If you want to stop making a line, you don't want this little tail, hit escape, it's gone. If you want to use the edit button, you can bend them around, but beware, because once you hit the edit, there are these little dots, one right there, and that's where I bent it originally. That's where my original bend came from. It creates a new anchor point, it's what's called, meaning between this anchor point and this little anchor point, those dots, is now a new line, and that's how you can interact and like move with it. If you don't really like that idea, let's say you're trying to make a circle, I would not recommend doing it with lines or curves. It doesn't really work, but I do have a way to show you how to do a circle properly without having to try to shape it to that, which doesn't really work. Line work's pretty easy. You choose, there's a pen, there's a line, there's a curve tool, pretty self-explanatory for the most part. And yeah, moving quickly along, here's a set. This is your little folder. You just drag up, and once it turns pink around the set and it indents, that means it's been put into the set. In any indication of like those pink lines, you can pull it out, and once it's not indented, it no longer exists in that set. Now, if you have a set filled with stuff in it, if you're on just the set and not one of these layers, you cannot delete the set. It will not allow you. People typically use sets for hair or maybe like a separate one for skin, whatever you want, just for organization purposes. But like I said, you cannot delete this set until you take everything out of your set, you click the folder alone, and then you delete it. Pretty easy. Then there is this is transfer down layer, and then there's merge down layer. Very similar yet different. I guess it depends on preference. Transfer down layer basically transfers all the stuff that was on that top one down to the one right under it. Now those two things move together. But that top layer is now empty. And like maybe you like that, maybe you want to add some stuff onto it. It really depends. Whereas merge down layer merges those, and now there's only 2 instead of 3 layers. Again, preference. Then there's the clear layer button. Just clears the entire layer. I don't typically use that button. I have a hotkey set for D, so I just press D, and then it just deletes everything on that layer. Especially when I'm sketching, I like to use it, but or if I mess up really bad. But yeah. And then obviously there's your trash can to delete layers. Moving on to box 2. Now up here, I have the first and 5th little icons selected, which is this nice round circular and square sort of color selector. Then I have these little pixels with colors that I typically use. It's really up to preference. You can choose sliders if you like to choose your colors that way. I don't. Or instead of maybe a pixel, you want this little sketchy thing. So if you choose one of your brushes, you can actually, whatever color you're on, you can color in instead. I don't like using that. I prefer just pixels and like this little round piece, but it's up to preference. Quickly moving down, we have our selection. This is your square selection. It makes it into a square. You can fill it in with a bucket. You could color it in. You can use cool textures or like move things around in it. I mean, it's whatever. Lasso, instead of a square, it's an organic, any shape you want. Magic wand, which you can do solid shapes like this if you want. But more important, what most people use the magic wand for is to color in line work. The ways that I like to use it are either select outside of whatever my object that I want to color in is, and then invert it, or you can just select it and then color it in. It's really your choice. You have the move. You have the move tool, which just sorry, I have something selected. The move tool just moves your little thing around. I love using this. If I don't have an object in a place I don't want it, I just scoot it around. Magnifying glass zooms you in. This little sort of septum piercing with arrow, like arrow shape, it rotates. Pretty easy. This hand moves your canvas around. I mentioned before that I use Q typically as my hotkey for this hand. It's the same thing as using this little thing up there. And then your color picker. I have a hotkey set for C for that, so I can just quickly pick colors that I like. And then next to it are these 2 boxes and this arrow. I have a hotkey set to X where I can switch between these colors. It's really good if you're doing maybe some kind of painting where you want to move quickly between 2 colors. That's typically what I use it for. You can set it to any colors you want and then quickly switch between them. Go from that to that. Super easy. Yeah. And then you have all your brushes. I'm not going to explain that into depth really. It's mostly just, with Paint Tool Sai, you can't really download brushes. In Paint Tool Sai 2, I believe you can download brushes. But in Paint Tool Sai 1, the OG, you basically have to hand do all of these settings, event settings or not. You can literally just go onto Pinterest, DeviantArt probably, Google, just look up like a brush that maybe you really like, and then basically you're gonna copy all the settings in that, and then you'll get the exact same brush. Like I said, it's a little bit time consuming, but once you have a brush like that, it just stays that way, and you can, if you double click on brushes, you can rename them, you can do shortcut keys. I have my main brush set to V because that's where my thumb sits, and so forth. And yeah, so that's all that. Tips and tricks. So first we're gonna do a circle. Let's turn these off And here we just have our little dude. Now, if you want a perfect circle and you don't want to have to draw it out, maybe you like need it for like whatever reason, it's super easy. So what I typically do is keep into consideration the top and bottom of your workspace. However close you're zoomed in is kind of how big your circle is going to be, very roughly. So keep that in mind. So my circle is probably going to be about this big, a little bit bigger, but I can also go in or whatever. So to make a circle, you're going to make a new line art or a line work layer and click curve. Choose your thickness. I'm going to choose something nice and thick for this one. And what you're going to do is take your hand off your tablet because you need a separate mouse, or like your mouse is maybe on like connected to your laptop or computer. You just want it to be stationary. And what you're going to do is when you press the delete key, it tilts your canvas ever so slightly. And what you do is you're gonna left click down and then press delete. Click down. Oh, oopsie. I did that wrong. Line art. There we go. Okay. So you're gonna click down, press delete. Click down, press delete. And just keep going back and forth. And what this is gonna do is the curve will very slowly, and the delete will slowly curve it into a perfect circle. There's plenty of tutorials on this online. I think I followed one originally on how to use this, but that's really the only thing I use the curve tool for. Now at the very end, you're going to get this little wonky thing. Press escape or press the pen tool, and that's going to stop that. And now you have a perfect circle. If you want to select inside this circle, you are going to have to combine your line work layer, because they work very weird, with a blank normal layer. Combine those, and now you're able to select the inside of this. And it can be whatever you want. And now is a perfect circle. Next, hue saturation. I briefly brought that up. Basically, you're going to go to filter, hue saturation, change the color, change your saturation, change your luminescence. Pretty self-explanatory, or you can do brightness and contrast. Very simple and similar. I think most of you could figure that one out just by playing with it. Then there's canvas crop. Now let's say I just want this image right here to be like my full canvas. Or maybe let's just say, if I make this bigger, let's say I really like the size of this, but there's too much at the top and bottom. I want to make it a little bit closer cropped. So use your selection tool and crop it exactly where you want, like this. You're going to go to canvas and then crop by selection, and now that's going to only crop it that way. Super handy to use sometimes if maybe you made your stuff too small and you don't want to go into canvas and then change size and manually change it. But it's going to give you some weird measurements if you do it by the crop by selection, I will admit. If you go to change size, see now it goes from 12 to like 9.2. If you have a specific like requirement, maybe don't do it that way. But yeah. Then there is sticker sort of thing, I guess you could call it. So in Paint Tool Sai, you can kind of make the border that stickers kind of have, that very nice white border some stickers have. You can do that. I'm going to make this one pink just so you can see it. But what you're going to do, press Control Shift and click on your layer, which is going to select your little character. It could be a full character, it could be a star, it could be anything you want. It selects this entire thing as an object. And what you do is you go up to Selection and press 1 or click on Increment. And that's going to ever so slightly move the pixels outward. If you continuously do this, it's going to slowly make it bigger and bigger. Make the selection much larger. And then, to make the actual border, you're going to make a new layer underneath. Click Bucket, fill that in, and now you have a cute little border. So that's super simple. Then there's new window. Some people like to use new window for references, or maybe they're doing a full piece and want to make sure it looks good not only up close but from afar. So what you do is you go to window or view and go to new, or you can just click N. I typically just press new. And what that did is right here, I also have this as another example, but here, you can make multiple windows. So like these two are the exact same. So I can interact with this little character, I can give it cute little blushy, and it does the same thing to the other one. It's just a separate window. So I can look at it not only from afar, or from up close, and I can change it. Yeah, exit out. Or you can use a reference. You can color pick from your reference, then come over and use that. Really up to you. Then you gotta get rid of that. And then there's canvas turn versus a rotate. So this is upright. This is how I would want my piece to be printed correctly. If I was to print it, this is how I would want it to look. When you use the rotate tool, or like this rotate tool, or anything like that, it's still going to remain printing upright. This is different if you go to canvas, rotate 90. Now, when I print this off, it's going to print out sideways. Just keep that in mind if you ever did that. And finally, there is full screen. So for full screen, you just press tab, and now everything on the side is gone. You can just press it again and it'll come back, but sometimes maybe you want a little bit more workspace and you know exactly all your hotkeys. Then you can just do all that, and then just bring it back, maybe select a new color, and blah blah. Super simple. Yeah. Quickly up here, there's your undo and redo, or you can use Control Z or Control V. Or sorry, Control Z is undo, Control C is copy, Control V is paste, and Control Y. Yeah, Control Y is redo. But you can set those hotkeys later on. Right here is your angle, or your zoom in, sorry, your zoom. Just press square to reset it, plus and minus increases and decreases. For zoom in, I typically have a hotkey set for J to zoom in and K to zoom out, since they're next to each other. This is like a rotation. You can set that anyway. Then there's this normal and invert, which flips your canvas, mirrors it. I have a hotkey set to H, so I automatically do that when I need to. And then there's stabilizer. So stabilizer is pretty easy to understand. 0 basically means if I want to go thick to thin, it's taking basically exactly what I'm doing, and it becomes very choppy. There's no little bit of leeway to make it look a bit smoother. It doesn't stabilize your lines. Whereas with maybe an S7, and I try to do the exact same thing, it becomes a bit laggy, but it's super smooth. Most people use 15. It's not only accurate to what I'm drawing, and it gives me a lot of flexibility and comfort, but also it makes sure all my lines are super smooth without lagging, I guess you could say. Yeah, I keep mine at 15. And yeah, and I think that's about it. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was short enough. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, this is like my first video, so I'm like super excited and like kind of like uneasy, just trying to figure out like how everything works. But yeah, tell me what you think, what I can like improve on and whatnot. And if you want any like other tutorials or like in-depth sort of stuff, you can do that. I plan on doing a bunch more tutorials, and yeah. So see you guys later. Bye.